Oh, what a week. Hey, who is the guest on this week's episode? You promised you would be back to normal this week. Relax, Arnold. We are back to normal. Mostly. Voidy's still MIA, but I'm sure he'll turn up. Anyway, this week's guest is Boo. Ah! Don't scare me like that. What are you talking about? I don't like jump scares. I'm gonna keep looking for Bookstack. Still on that, huh? Alright, anyway, I gotta get back to this script.
Hello! We wants to know who is on this week's episode of the podcast.
Oh, you too? Why does everyone keep asking me that? It's Boo.
Yeah! That's not nice. We don't like those jump scares. Yeah, we're leaving.
What is up with everyone? Last I checked, Boo isn't a horror writer. Although I suppose if you count some of her work about current events, you could call that horror.
Greetings. I have arrived to help with the narration for this week's episode.
Oh, hey, David. No, it's all good. I actually don't need you this week. But if you want to stick around, you can check out the interview.
Ah, a guest. And who is it this week?
It's Boo.
Oh, dear me. You must be careful. At my age, my heart cannot take sudden startles like that.
Okay, why does that keep happening? Oh, okay. I get it. That's pretty funny, actually. Maybe I'll put that joke in this week's script. Hey, wait a second, I guess I already did. Ooh, this is getting way too meta. Time to wrap up this intro. Welcome, everyone, to the Saved as Draft podcast. Oh, and hey, Boo. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 33 of the Saved as Draft podcast. You know, I probably dragged on that opening joke for too long, but this week's episode is indeed a return to form. We'll start with some quick housekeeping before heading into our weekly shoutouts, a bunch of power-up prompt stories, some discussion on feedback for writers, and an interview with poet and flash fiction author Boo Pfeiffer. Before we get into all that, though, I have a couple special announcements. First, I'm very excited to finally unveil a brand new Audio Mazes production that I worked on that's releasing very soon. It's an immersive audio drama with a branching narrative called Light, Hope, and Stardust. I co-authored the story alongside the immensely talented J. Allen Winchester. It was simultaneously the most difficult and most rewarding project I think I've ever written. You see, it's no coincidence that this audio drama is releasing during National Suicide Prevention Month. This story is one about human connection. It's about hope. And it's about the wars that we wage in our own minds. It's really powerful, and it carries a positive message, but it doesn't shy away from topics and struggles that I think we'll all recognize. It's a story that's meant to serve as a reminder that we all matter, that our actions have real and meaningful impact on those around us. I'm really proud of the work that I did alongside my co-author for this story. And of course, I have to give a huge shout out to the team at Audio Mazes and the incredible narrators and voice actors who all help bring this story to life. Audio Mazes is also partnering with Emma White, USA Today's 2024 Woman of the Year, and her organization, Life is Worth It, to bring not only this story but other mental health resources to those who need it most. So it's a really good cause that I'm really proud to be a part of. And again, I can't express how grateful I am to Audio Mazes for the opportunity to work on a story like this and to support a cause that I really believe in with my art. The full audio drama is releasing very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for more information, because I will be sharing a link on Substack here as soon as it's available. Okay, and my other big announcement for this week is that I've finally set a start date for my upcoming Devine series, The Order of the Pawn. Finton and I joined Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast earlier this week to share that Chapter 1 of the series, which is well over 5 years in the making, will be releasing on Tuesday, September 16th as part of Tome Tuesday. New chapters will drop every 2 weeks, and it will indeed be a serial fiction series that goes on for the foreseeable future. So, Devine fans, you got a lot to look forward to. Okay, and that's it for housekeeping this week. Let's dive into this week's shoutouts right after a short message. Hey, how you doing? I'm Tony, and this right here is the most average commercial you'll ever hear. What? I hear you ask? What kind of sales pitch is that? It's an honest one. You see, at Tony's Honest Hotline, we tell you how it is. So go on, ask the hard questions. Does that dress make you look fat? How should I know? We're talking on the phone. What's the meaning of life? 42, and honestly, you should know that. What the hell are they teaching kids in school these days anyway? And hey, as a special for Saved as Draft listeners, you can even call in for feedback on your story. Go ahead, ask me if I liked it. Odds are, I didn't even read it, but if I did, I'll be sure to let you know what I think. Oh, and add pictures. I like pictures. So yeah, call Tony's Honesty Hotline at 1-800-555-WHAT-IT-IS and get the answers to your burning questions today. Alright, and we're back. Every week I post a thread in my subscriber chat where I ask folks to share links to their latest work. I select 5 at random and feature them right here on the show. Remember, if you share links in that weekly thread, you also get a chance to be featured on Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast as well, so it's well worth the time. And with that out of the way, here are this week's shoutouts. First up this week is The Shadow Man by Verdant Butterfly. This poem immediately spoke to a part of me that was terrified of the dark as a child. It tells the story of a shadowy figure who comes out when the lights go out and children are going to sleep. It shifts from one style of poetry to another throughout the piece as well, which I really loved. Verdant Butterfly is honestly an absolute master of imagery, and that of course is the case here as well. Each line is packed with wonderful visual flair, and the stanzas that rhyme feel like a dark fairy tale in the best way. Here's an excerpt that I enjoy that showcases both styles you'll find in the poem. Parents smile and say, "There's nothing there," but the children know. They keep their limbs tucked in. They learn the rhyme by heart. It is not a song. It is survival. Mama said there's nothing there, but shadows whisper everywhere. Close your eyes, pretend he's gone. The monster vanishes with the dawn. I'm telling you, it's always a good day when I get to read something new from Verdant Butterfly, one of my favorite writers on Substack, so check the show notes for a link. Second this week is Sitcom Voices by Hazel. Hazel doesn't do short stories very often, as we learned about in their recent interview, but when they do, it's always a treat. This piece immediately grabs your attention with its witty voice and well-defined character, but it'll soon send you on a roller coaster ride that you won't see coming. The piece starts out small in scope, but it quickly balloons into something much larger. It honestly weaves in an impressive amount of world building that I won't spoil here, but then, by the end, it cleverly pulls things back in for an ending that had me desperate to learn more. It's charming, creative, and a really unique piece. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. The city bus had just pulled away when I get there. Then, not a sitcom laugh, but a snicker. Shaking and confused, I turn around desperately to find the source. No one else is there. No one but me and my body on the ground after being hit by a bus. Wait, what? What? I'm standing there. No, floating there in shock. This has to be some sort of trick. It must be. But seconds pass by, the rest of the city is moving, and in the distance, I hear police sirens getting closer. It's right at this point that things really get crazy in the story, so again, check the show notes for a link. Third this week is Unstitched by J.M. Gooding. This is apparently in response to a prompt from Anomi, who I have not heard of, but you can bet I'm subscribed now. The prompt that inspired this story is, a hidden fear. Imagine a fear you have isn't just in your mind, but has taken on a physical form, like a small, quiet creature that follows you around. Describe what it looks like and how it behaves. What would you say to it if you could converse with it? First off, really nice prompt. Let's dive into JM's story. The first thing I noticed while reading this is that JM has absolutely sublime skills when it comes to haunting imagery. In fact, I would put him right up there with Spencer D.W., and if you've read Spencer's work, you know how much of a compliment that is. I interpreted the creature here as a sort of physical manifestation of imposter syndrome. The way it appears every time he tries to be creative was a clue, but the fact that it's built of all the things he never really made or finished making made me think that this is the voice, or rather in the story, a scream that writers and artists hear when we start to doubt ourselves and our skills. In any case, the piece is superbly written. Here's an excerpt that I think you'll really like. The body is built of everything I tried to create. Kindergarten finger paints smear into sinew. The clay pot I made for my mother in 3rd grade warped into a ribcage. That essay on roughing it from high school, torn and stretched into skin. A collage of the photographs I took on vacation last year, worn like vambraces. Margins for skin, red ink slashed into veins, revisions stitched over muscle, whole pages torn into ligaments. Staves of my music warped into bone, adjectives blistering across its chest, verbs twitching along its arms. My language, my music, stolen and rewoven into a banshee of sound. It doesn't lunge, it doesn't claw, it only stares, eyes wet, hollow, mouth screaming, as more words strip themselves from my throat and drift to join its festering flesh. Holy crap! Woo! That is some amazing imagery. Please check the show notes for a link to this one as well. It is a fantastic story. Fourth this week is Nemesis by Daniel Coates. This story was a really nice mystery and detective thriller. It reads a bit like a mix of Sherlock Holmes with a little dash of James Bond in the form of the villain. It establishes a great sense of intrigue from the beginning, and the main character's paranoia really builds nice tension as you get into it. Her suspicions, of course, eventually turn out to be warranted, but that rising sort of fear that comes from being inside her head had me on the edge of my seat, just wondering when that proverbial poop was going to hit the fan, if you will. Oh, and trust me, it hits the fan. Things quickly shift into action mode with some really nice banter and dialogue in the second half of the piece. It's a story that doesn't waste a single word, and the pacing is all the better for it. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. The gesture jolted something inside Maggie, but she couldn't place what. Her unease multiplied. Before she could object, though, she was dragged inside by her positively giddy companion. The lobby of the building, if you could call it a lobby, was massive and thoroughly decorated. She guessed over 100 people were here, milling about and engaging in small talk over hors d'oeuvres and glasses of wine. It seemed mild for the most part, but she could have sworn that more than a few gazes lingered on the pair of them when they entered. Every person she looked at seemed to be just looking away. She whispered to her friend, "Careful, Luann. Something doesn't feel right here." I really enjoyed this one. Check the show notes for a link. Our final shout-out this week is Unscripted by Letters from a Poet. The link from my shout-outs thread is actually chapter 18 of a larger work, and it's the latest chapter that the author plans to publish for free before they go to publish the full piece later on. I read some of this chapter, but ultimately decided to go back to chapter 1 so I could get a better idea of the story as a whole. One thing I'll say is that the writing here is really wonderful. It flows very well, and the dialogue feels very realistic and genuine. Even as someone who jumped into chapter 18 when I was first looking at this, I could honestly feel the connection between the characters. It's really impressive stuff. Here's an excerpt that I enjoyed from chapter 1. Half an hour later, she walked into the kitchen, her mum briefly glancing up before returning her concentration to the latest issue of the midnight paper. "Morning," Vivian said, grabbing a bowl in the cereal box, the latter of which was close to being empty. They had toast, of course, but her morning bowl of hoops was part of her routine, and she'd prefer to keep to it, so she'd have to go to the shops later. There was a minute's delay before the answering, "Morning," and Vivian smiled, but didn't try to compete for her attention. She knew better than that. "Livy's gone and stolen credit for my work again," her mum said, tapping an article on the page in front of her as her lip twitched. "That's the second time in the past week," she muttered. Sharp writing and great characters and dialogue, this is one series I definitely recommend you check out, and keep an eye out for when it's published as well. Next up is our Level 3 stories from this week's Power Up prompt, right after a quick, mindful moment. Hey there, this is Chill Bradley, back with another mindful moment. Here's a quote to consider. If a story is in you, it has to come out. William Faulkner. I have a framed piece of art in my home office that shares a similar sentiment. It says, "A writer is a world trapped in a person." A lot of writers think they have to reach some sort of milestone or accomplish some sort of goal before they're a real writer. But I'm here to remind you, that's not true. If you have stories and worlds trapped inside you, begging to be let out, then I have news for you. You're a writer. And here's the thing. That story doesn't need to be kept on a cloud drive. It doesn't need to collect dust in a notebook. You don't need to hide it from the world. Whether it's your first story or your 100th one, someone out there is waiting to read it. Your work is going to change someone's life. So don't let some imaginary pressure or imposter syndrome try to tell you otherwise. Your art deserves to exist. Set it free. Now, back to the show. All right, and we are back. So This week's power-up prompt was honestly a massive success. We had nearly 10 people submit stories, including a few new authors who wrote power-up prompt stories for the first time. This week's prompt was open genre, and it had 3 elements for writers to use. The setting was a transportation hub. The character, a conspiracy theorist. And the conflict, a lockdown. So let's dive in and see what my fellow writers came up with. And as always, the focus with this segment will be talking about what made each story stand out, and how it uniquely leveraged the elements of the prompt. Our first story this week is The Subway Station Below 3rd and Collins by CJ Knight, aka Terrifying Tales. With this piece, CJ offers up some truly excellent characterization in the form of our protagonist, Chuck. His role as the conspiracy theorist is extremely well defined, and the story does a great job of building out his state of mind as we head into the main portion of the piece. We quickly identify with him, and we understand why he's so paranoid. As things go on, the story takes a few exciting twists as well, including a fresh take on a familiar concept. I really love the ending too. The final lines were excellent. Our second power-up prompt story this week is Chaos at the Caravanserai by Richard Pack. Richard went full horror with this one, and I gotta say, the imagery had me squirming. And that's impressive given how desensitized I am to horror after years of writing it, watching it, and playing every horror game I can get my hands on. Something that always comes up when I discuss Richard's work too is his insanely good world building. Every story Richard writes feels like it's set in a vivid, rich, and fully realized world. The fact that he does this with short stories too is nothing short of incredible. With this one, we get some really nice set dressing in the beginning before leaping right into dialogue. It's perfectly paced, and once the horror starts, you will not be able to look away. And once again, the ending here, superb. The final lines are chilling. Third this week is The Last Bus to San Francisco by Tricia Meyer. This one's short, but it's a powerful roller coaster that packs in some serious revelations. It starts simply enough with someone trying to get out of town, only to find out that all the buses have been canceled. Things quickly escalate though as we discover the main character had a hand in what's happening. It escalates fast, and it ends with a chilling confirmation about how the protagonist was involved in what's going on. The entire story arc here is super sharp, and the implications are shocking. I loved how concentrated this piece was, so don't forget to check the notes as well for a link to this and all of our other power-up prompt stories this week, and thanks again to Tricia for this excellent entry. Number 4 on our list of power-up prompt stories this week is The Last Flight Out by Mary Ellen Brady. It has been way too long since I read a Mary Ellen story, so I was very excited for this one. Mary Ellen's stories always have this amazing level of detail and polish that I love and enjoy. This piece is no different. It sets up the perfect scenario with a podcaster who is known for uncovering cover-ups, suddenly finding themselves in the middle of one. I also appreciated how this one was set at the Denver airport, which actually inspired this week's prompt. The way the mystery slowly unravels here is perfect. There's a sense of danger as warnings descend on the main character, but she keeps pushing toward the truth anyway. It all builds toward a shocking revelation and a cliffhanger that will have you begging for a part 2. Our 5th power-up prompt story this week is Safe Travels by Jennifer Jorgensen. This piece immediately pulls you in with excellent use of in media res, which is a technique that involves jumping right into the middle of the action. Within a couple sentences, you're already invested. Intrigue begins to build with mention of something called the Matter Transmission Center, and it just builds from there. There's dialogue about changing people, about how you don't come back the same, and it's really good stuff. The best part about this story is that it makes good on its promises as well. As you're reading, the questions keep building and building, but answers do eventually come along, and they're just as satisfying as you would hope. The entire concept is really unique, and I loved how well it was executed. It's phenomenal work from Jennifer, and honestly, one of my favorite power-up prompt stories that I've read since I started doing these. Please check it out. There's a link in the show notes. Number 6 this week is Behind the Eyes of Blucifer by Mina Howell. This is our second story set in the Denver airport, which is, of course, like I said, what inspired the power-up prompt this week. What I loved about this one was how Mina leaned into the real-world conspiracy theories and lore surrounding this airport. In this case, a major focus was the haunting blue Mustang statue outside the airport known as Blucifer. In addition to looking really scary, this statue is also infamous for killing its creator in a strange accident in real life. Mina leans into this with her story, telling a tale with plenty of twists and turns, but one that ultimately becomes quite emotional by the end. It's a really unique direction, and I love how it builds upon real-world conspiracy theories in meaningful ways. I loved everything about it, and honestly, Mina went truly above and beyond with this week's prompt, so it's a story that's well worth a read. Number 7 this week is No Space Courier Drone 00 IV by Colton Iverson. This story is exciting for a number of reasons. It's the first time Colton has joined the power-up prompts, and it's a story set in the same universe as one of his Audio Mazes stories called No Space to Run. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I love a connected universe. As you may know, Colton is the chief publication director at Audio Mazes, and I've long been a fan of his work, so it's an honor to have him joining the power-up prompt this week, and let me tell you, this story did not disappoint. It details an exchange between a VLF courier drone and a human who has shown up unexpectedly. As you can imagine, the drone is simply focused on protocol and finishing its delivery, but the human tries to convince it to help him. Their banter back and forth is hilarious. It reminds me of the humor you'd find in classic games like Portal and Portal 2, but just like those games, it has a lot of heart as well. By the end, the two reach a mutual understanding, and it feels like this story sets up what could be a really exciting spin-off series set in the No Space to Run universe. I, for one, will be there to read it for sure. Our 8th story this week is The Smuggler's Conspiracy by Charlotte Henley Babb. This story is another great example of world building. Within a few paragraphs, I was immediately immersed in the world and invested in our reptilian protagonist. There's a sense of fear and danger right from the beginning that really served the overall immersion, but I have to give a nod to the dialogue as the star of the show here. The way the characters banter back and forth is excellent, and it flows effortlessly. This is especially true in the scene where our protagonist is being interrogated. I was practically chewing my nails while reading, because I kept thinking, how is she going to get out of this one? An excellent entry into this week's prompt that combines intrigue with some sci-fi world building and more than a dash of paranoia. Awesome work from Charlotte. Our final power-up prompt story this week is Ghost at Convergence Station by River. Now, I've never been to Meow Wolf, but I love how this story uses that real-world location in Denver to tell its story. This is also a piece that caught me off guard in the best way possible because it combines sharp humor with very intense emotional flashbacks. I also really liked how the lockdown aspect of the story was mental in nature. It used the concept as a way to show someone being trapped within their own thoughts, which is arguably worse than a physical lockdown. The story starts with a family going to Meow Wolf, and it immediately opens with some hilarious jokes about overpriced food and being overstimulated. Things take a turn, though, when our conspiracy theorist character shows up. There's more jokes about common conspiracy theories, but then the story shifts into these moments where italics are used to reference the protagonist's past. These moments are a massive shift in tone and recall some truly traumatic experiences. This juxtaposition between the past and present, it's a really fascinating structure that caught me off guard, like I mentioned, but in a very good way. It ends up being a story that plays with emotional contrasts in a really compelling way, and it lands on a sincere note as a result. Really unique and compelling work from River here, so thank you to River and everyone else for participating in this week's Power Up Prompt stories. You know I love reading them, and it's amazing how creative everyone gets with just a few simple elements. I love it. We're not done hearing from the community yet either, because next up is our weekly writing discussion. But first, a quick message from an up-and-coming new business that's entirely fictional. For now.
Hey there, my name's Dan, and I want to ask you a question. How would you describe our world right now? If you said a dumpster fire, you'd be right. But here's the problem. There's so many horrible things going wrong that most people may not know what specific type of dumpster fire you're referring to. What's an externally exhausted human being in 2025 to do? Haha, well, obviously, the answer is to ride around in a dumpster fire that truly reflects the thing you hate most about our world. That's why I decided to open Dan's Dumpster Fire Dealership. We offer the widest selection of dumpster fires this side of an asteroid impact that mercifully wipes out our crumbling civilization. If you act now, you can even secure our brand new limited edition Tangerine Dumpster Fire. It's got realistic bruising on the handles, too. If you know, you know. So whether you're lamenting the loss of privacy, spiraling in the wake of an unchecked global climate change, or trying to put on a brave face as our country slowly gets taken over by lobotomized fascists, we've got a dumpster fire that can help you express your existential dread. So come on down to Dan's Dumpster Fire Dealership today.
And we're back. I honestly don't know where I get these segue ideas, but shout out to Nikki, the Nocturnal Narrator, for suggesting the idea. I have a lot of fun with these each week. Okay, so welcome to this week's writing discussion, which is all about feedback. Writers often struggle about how to give and receive feedback. It's one of those skills that I'm constantly practicing and improving myself. It took me a long time to get to the point where I stopped taking critique personally as well. The best kind of feedback is balanced and focused on trying to help the story become the best it can be. Now, of course, there's such a thing as bad feedback. Some people can just be wildly off base or even rude. And while that's unfortunate, it's important that we don't let bad experiences like that stop us from creating our art and inviting good feedback. In the interest of all this, I asked everyone in my subscriber chat to share their thoughts on how they approach feedback. We got some really awesome answers, so let's dive in and take a look. First up, J. Allen Winchester says, "When I first started writing as a kid, I only shared it with adults, and they would give me gentle feedback. When I started sharing with peers in middle school, I was a bit ahead of them, so they either liked or didn't like it with nothing to offer me. I stalled out for a little while because I thought my stories weren't interesting enough, and it took me years to get any confidence back to work on my first manuscript. I was protective of my stuff for a while as well, especially since most input I received wasn't helpful, and I felt dismissed as out of touch. After attending an art school in my late 20s, part of our grade was critique, so I learned how to give and receive criticism. It was helpful to understand what was helpful to other creatives, and I learned to separate opinion from objective feedback. Now, I call feedback the stardust of my universe left by those that travel through it." Amazing input there from J. Allen Winchester. Sometimes we just need to experience in real time like that what it means to give and receive useful feedback and how to separate that from just plain old criticism. Possum Kingdom says, "When someone asks me for feedback, I treat it like if someone asked me if they have something in their teeth. They asked, and if it were me, I'd want to know. If they're my friend or I know them well enough, I'm able to discern how receptive they'd be to different ways of communicating the feedback. However, I try my very best not to put someone in a feedback trap I find myself in a lot when I ask for feedback. With writing, it's hard to know if someone's feedback is valuable or right, meaning sometimes if I give feedback I don't agree with, it's hard to tell if my feelings are in the way or if it's valuable, and if what they said is off the mark or would actually make my shared piece worse. I don't like being there, so I try not to put someone in that position. If I'm asked for feedback on a piece of writing that's not my forte or wheelhouse, I'll ask if they're sure because this isn't really my area. Then I'll ask what kind of feedback they want. Do they want my feedback as a reader or as an editor? Either way, half the time we look for feedback is really us fearfully looking for external validation that what we make is good. And well, if you're approaching your writing like that, you'll never appreciate the practice of writing, let alone the fulfillment of finishing and sharing all of your work." Really good points here from Possum Kingdom. I think it's one of those things where you have to kind of go into it and set expectations, and there's going to be situations where you don't really have, as they said, a lot of expertise on the story or maybe the genre, so that's also important to consider as well. So having that sort of mutual understanding with someone when you're giving feedback is really important. And also, they make a really good point at the end here about the difference between seeking actual critique on your stories and, sort of just that external validation. And obviously, we all want to be validated. We want people to enjoy our work. But we really have to be careful about putting too much of that into our request for feedback. Because then if you don't get, all positive feedback, all of a sudden, it becomes something that hurts your feelings. And that's not really the point of discussions like this. So, really good points from Possum Kingdom there. Jennifer Jorgensen says, "I love receiving critique, so long as it's specific enough to learn from. This sucks is not critique in my mind. I mean, it's good to know it's not landing, but it'd be a lot more helpful to know why or exactly what's not landing. Same for positive comments, really. Anything specific is welcomed. When I give feedback, I always try to be specific, but I found on Substack so far that even people who say they want feedback often dismiss it or get defensive. It's made me much more careful about giving any responses that aren't fully positive." Yeah, Jennifer, that's a really good point. I always try to just kind of focus on the positive aspects of things that I read on Substack, because at the end of the day, I can find something positive in just about anything, right? Like there's good in everything, right? When it comes to giving sort of balanced feedback or, critiques, one person that I'd recommend looking at is Spencer D.W. He's a phenomenal horror author, but early on in my time in Substack, when I first met him, he just straight up asked, he's like, "Hey, would you like feedback on this, like critique on it?" And I appreciated that, and I really liked the way that he delivered it. And, I don't think even someone like him has it entirely figured out. I don't have it entirely figured out. It's really hard to know how something you say is going to be received, especially on the internet like this. But I think it's important to keep trying and to keep striking up those mutual understandings. It's really one of those things where maybe you just need to get to know the author a bit before you broach the subject of feedback beyond just kind of, some initial impressions. Wendy Cockcroft says, I crave feedback. Negative feedback helps me to understand how to improve as a writer, and while it may sting sometimes, I need it. I'm happy to give it, but I've learned there are rules. These are, number 1, don't give unsolicited advice. Some people don't like it and might take it the wrong way. If people don't or won't take your advice on board, that's up to them. Don't push it. And rule number 3, try to find something positive to say before the negative. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Lastly, number 4, ensure you know what you're on about before you type. It's embarrassing to have your error exposed, especially where others can see it. Yeah, really good points here. I agree with all 4 of them. You don't want to just throw out unsolicited critique. And, if people don't want to take your advice, that's their prerogative as well. And I'm also a big fan of number 3 here. Balanced feedback is super important. You want to have both positive and negative / kind of, critique in there as well. All right. And Teresa Green says, I think I am my own worst critic. Every word goes through the ringer. Does it fit? Is it meaningful? Does it add to the piece or lessen it? I could go on, but you get the picture, I know. Nothing any critic says could hurt me as much as I hurt myself. Oh, that's unfortunately very true. I think as writers, we are all our own worst critics. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that we have to separate the imposter syndrome from what's actually going to help make the story the best it can be. At the end of the day, like I said, we're all our own worst critics, but try not to be too harsh on yourself. That's my input there. Next up, the Autumn Star says, I enjoy receiving feedback, but I protect myself in my creative efforts by setting up feedback boundaries. I receive feedback, examine it, evaluate it, and then against my own instincts and decide if I will accept it or act on it. Part of the evaluation process is who is giving me this feedback and what's their motivation. I've been working as an editor for almost 20 years, and I take offering feedback very seriously. It's important not to turn the story into what you would prefer it would be. You can't make an apple into a banana. You have to look at the apple and say, if you change this and this, your apple will be even more delicious. I enter every editing gig with an open mind and an empathetic heart. People are sharing their art with me. I have a responsibility to give them the same level of care to my feedback as they gave to the creation of the work. I love this. And I love that we're getting a perspective here from an experienced editor. It's really important, as the Autumn Star said, not to make the story out what you would prefer it to be. You have to try and help them get to the best possible version of what's on the page. And so I think that's really good input here across the board. Mina Howell says, I definitely have issues with getting defensive over criticism. Always have. I'm trying to work on it by putting myself in uncomfy positions like having beta readers, but it's definitely hard. I think a lot of it can be a trauma response and trying to differentiate an actual attack or just constructive criticism, and it's a really important part of working through, even if it's hard. Really good points there from Mina. I think, we've all had experiences ranging in terms of severity where we've had sort of like traumatic feedback on our work, whether it was someone we respect or a parent or a teacher or someone like that, giving us harsh, negative, maybe unfounded feedback that can really set a writer back. So it's one of those things where, as I said in the chat here, I'm really proud of Mina for pushing through that, because I have even faced stuff like that in the past, and it made it hard to sort of open back up to the idea of feedback at all. So really good points there. Next up, Murphy Carpenter says, I think the worst thing we can do is call a story our baby, making it precious. Critique is good for the soul. It makes us look at our work with fresh eyes. Sometimes we need to cut the baby to find the real jewel inside. Dark, but yes, if suggestions will work or not, so take what works with your vision and run. Really good points there. We have to, again, not allow feedback to be personal. It's about the work, it's about the story, it's about making it the best it can be. Robert Brewer says, I view criticism in 2 ways. If someone tells me how the story worked for them, I find that informative and helpful. However, if they start telling me that they didn't like the way the story played out, I tell them that life is like that sometimes. If they comment on my writing style or use of my words, for example, I see that as a reason to go back and edit. I only started writing properly in retirement for 2 reasons. When I was younger, I found that most authors could express themselves better than me, and number two, writing novel-length stories provides an escape and is therapeutic, suggesting that I should have done it sooner. Well, I'm really glad that Robert is writing here and that he's getting into this. And I think this is a healthy way of looking at criticism and feedback. When it comes to like story beats and stuff like that, I think it's important to be open to critique about how the story flows. But at the end of the day, it is your vision, right? So I think that in this case, focusing on stylistic critique or word choice and stuff like that is something more tangible that you can go in and edit. So good points here. Tanya Weatherly says, I worked in content marketing for an SEO agency most of my career, and taking criticism from clients and staff was all part of the job. So I think that has made it easier for me to handle in fiction writing too. You can also learn quickly what advice is worth taking or not. Really good points there. I also work in marketing now, but I did work with SEO and kind of digital marketing. And that was a time when I really had to learn how to take criticism from clients. So that kind of experience really is helpful in terms of understanding feedback. Great point. Next up, Annie Guile Bentalon says, oh, I love this topic. I really value receiving feedback, even the critical kind, because it pushes me to grow and do better. Giving feedback, though, is a different story. I often hesitate because I worry about offending someone or whether my perspective even quote-unquote counts. I remind myself that before I was a writer, I was a reader, really, truly a reader. But sometimes I question whether that experience gives me enough credibility to speak up. So I've held back from offering critical feedback even when I've wanted to. It's funny, isn't it? How much courage it takes just to share what we notice or feel. Well, Annie Guile, I have received some amazing feedback from you in the past, and for what it's worth, I would never mind if you wanted to critique any of my work, because I do think that you are an excellent reader and that you have a very good eye for what good storytelling is, and I've read enough of your work to say that as well, that's the case with your work, of course. So, I wouldn't get so hung up on whether or not you're quote-unquote qualified. I think everybody's opinion, as long as you're not being rude or attacking the writer directly, I think everybody's opinion is valid. Again, as we heard earlier, whether or not the writer takes the advice is up to them. So really, your only responsibility is just to provide honest and valuable feedback, and that's that. So I hope that you are able to, start giving more feedback as time goes on. Like I said, you are always welcome to do so with my work. All right, and lastly, Dana Von Alman writes, I love to hear critique of my writing. How else do I learn what will resonate with the masses? But critique should always be delivered with kindness, followed by honesty, and if you cannot be kind in your delivery, then move on. No one wants to hear what you have to say. Harsh but true, honestly. Like I said, feedback is only valid when it's respectful, focused on the story, and balanced, honestly. Amazing input here from the community as always, so thank you again to everyone who responded, and stay tuned for a new writing discussion thread next Wednesday. Next up, we're going to dive straight into this week's featured guest interview. This week, I'm very excited to welcome onto the show a poet and flash fiction author that has been an incredible supporter of mine from the very beginning. In this interview, we cover a wide range of topics, so I really hope you enjoy. And without further ado, let's dive in. All right, everyone, and this week I'm really excited to welcome to the Saved as Draft podcast a poet and writer who you may recognize. Please welcome to the show, Boo Pfeiffer. Boo, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Bradley.
So let's start off by having you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
I realized that I didn't ask you if you prefer Brad or Bradley. I cannot answer another question until I know that.
Totally fine. Bradley is what I prefer. Yep.
Okay, got it. Okay, so thank you, Bradley.
Yeah.
So I have had an interesting creative journey, an interesting iteration of lives. I started out as a college student who assumed that she would be a writer, though I also was going to be a doctor. But, there's Frida McFadden to show us all that you can do both really well. And then I had a professor that pretty much told me that my work sucked. And I stopped writing for a while and went on to work as a healthcare policy specialist for quite a while. And then left that to travel when I no longer agreed with the government that I was working for. Though I got to tell you, 25 years ago was not nearly as bad as today. And I started my own business, and then I started my family. And that's when I really wanted to start writing again, though I didn't have as many outlets as there are now. So I didn't do a great job of it, but I kind of started wending my way back into writing with a blog that was called Boo Pfeiffer's What the Fuck. And oh, can I swear on your podcast?
That's totally fine. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Anyway, so I had started that. That was largely about like stupid stuff that happens in Miami and stupid political stuff. And then I kind of let it languish because I did not like WordPress was not intuitive to me. So that was largely why I didn't really keep up with it. And then I found Substack and I thought, oh, this is easy. Like I can do this. So I moved the blog over intending to be blogging.
Hmm.
But then I discovered this whole world of creative geniuses and I was so inspired. It was like, like if you have the stomach flu and for the first couple days you don't want to eat, but then the next couple days you're starving, but you can't eat yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you start eating again. And that's kind of like what feeding my soul was like with Substack. So I just like soaked up everything I could. And then I was like, okay, I've absorbed so much, I can start squeezing it out and giving it back now. And so it's really Substack that got me back to writing and back where I probably should have been decades ago, but I won't tell you how many.
Wow, I mean, that's such an interesting journey, and honestly, it's horrible to hear that that professor kind of like, stamped out you sort of like your creative spark there by being so like negative about your work. I can't even imagine. That just sounds horrific to me. But I can also see where you're coming from, how that would have kind of, taken away sort of the wind out of your sails. I'm really glad to hear though that you came back to it. How long have you been on Substack?
I started in late December, like right around the holidays. So uh, whatever this is September. So 9 months.
Wow, okay. Yeah. And so, yeah, like, one thing that I really like about your work is, obviously you do poetry, you do flash fiction, you do thought pieces. So, what was that transition? Because you mentioned, obviously, a lot of your work focuses on like, kind of social and political commentary. How did you sort of get into poetry specifically? Like, what was the kind of the journey that led from one to the other?
I don't do well with rules or boxes or conforming to anything. So
Hmm.
free verse and my personality are, very well suited to one another. Um, so, I mean, I think that's at base, poetry is the easiest for me because I can say whatever I want to and there's no rules. And I wish that I had realized that in college.
Mm.
Um, so that's not so hard because I've also been told that I write like I speak, which is unfiltered and without a lot of extra fluff.
Hmm.
Um, so that was easy. Somewhere along the way, I would say a couple years before COVID, and I forgot to mention this, a dear friend of mine went to grad school to get his MFA in creative writing. And he we called me a shadow student. So I got to read whatever they were reading in class. And to the extent that I had time for, do some of the exercises.
Hmm.
And I fell in love with flash fiction because I still had very little time to write.
Hmm.
And you really have to get to the point, and there's not room for a lot of fluff. So that was also easy. And as I hear myself, I realize I probably have to start challenging myself more. Poetry with rules is harder for me. I like the challenge when I have time, but I always feel like rhymes are forced. Like I can't, sometimes things come out rhyming. Like I recall writing something and like I was sitting out front of school trying to pick up my daughter and I was able to write something that rhymed. Like it just came out that way. But
Hmm.
if I try to rhyme, it doesn't work. So I don't think there really was a transition. I think I just opened my heart and mind and iPad all at the same time.
I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's nice to have like a lack of boundaries, but then also in other cases like flash fiction, it can be helpful to kind of have some, like sort of like a structure to work in. So that makes a lot of sense. So, do you remember the first poem you ever wrote? I'm curious.
Yes, it's very short. I can recite it to you if you'd like,
Sure, that'd be great.
but I might burst out laughing. So I was 6, and we were driving home from my grandmother's house on a Friday night after dinner, and Yeah, the storm was pretty bad. So I wrote this poem. Thunder is lightning's shadow. A shadow is a double U. And when there's thunder and lightning, there's always rain too.
Hmm.
And that right there is why I don't do rhymes anymore.
Well, I still think it's a good piece. I mean, I like it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. My 6 year old self is happy. And then I had a piece published when I was like 11 that I actually really like. And then, you know, not much happened in all those intervening decades.
As part of your work, what kind of themes and topics do you tend to focus on? Obviously, we touched upon a little bit of some kind of the social and political side of things, but like how do you, whether it's, poetry or flash fiction, what are some of like kind of the themes and topics that always are like at the forefront of your mind when you're writing?
My poetry is always nature inspired, unless it's political or social.
Hmm.
That excuse me, that doesn't mean that's necessarily about nature, but like I find a lot of my analogies are nature based, just like very in tune with nature, and I need nature to clear my head. So I think that that's just where a lot of my work comes from organically. Loss, uh, very often found. Love, unrequited love, or stressful love. Um, yeah, I think those are the main themes for poetry. For Flash, it turns out I kind of have a slightly evil side.
Mm.
Um, so I really like kind of twisted or surprising and not necessarily pleasant surprise Flash.
Hmm.
A lot of what I've done has also been social commentary, but not really like dystopian, I guess. I think that's probably the best word. Probably a little bit dystopian, at least in my mind.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of my flash also comes from prompts, which is really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm such a big fan of prompts. Yeah, I've always loved how kind of eclectic your work is. Like, you're able to kind of jump between all different types of like topics and settings. And even just now when you were describing like the difference between your poetry and flash fiction, it's just amazing how you can kind of adapt to all these different sort of, topics and angles and themes and stuff. It's something that I've always really admired about your work.
Oh, thank you.
So, what are your primary sources of inspiration? Like, where do you often find yourself being most inspired? And like, is it other hobbies, or is it like, kind of, stuff in your day-to-day life, or where does that inspiration come from?
A lot comes from my spiritual home on Lake Superior. Like it sounds really corny,
Mm.
but like northern Minnesota is where my soul regenerates. And I just feel like that's where I'm most the person that I'm supposed to be, and life sometimes gets in the way. So a lot comes from there, whether it's physically being there or how I feel there or wishing I were there. Um, and also kind of reflecting back on the years and the changes I've seen there. That was actually the impetus for the collection that I'm trying to do called Climate Change. So a lot definitely comes from there. And a lot, it turns out, comes from stuff that I probably should have dealt with over the past unmentioned number of decades, but didn't really until I started writing again. So a lot of life experience and unprocessed emotion. So kind of like you guys are all being my therapists, and thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm also someone who definitely treats writing as kind of a form of therapy, or trying to kind of just process things through like stories and poetry and stuff. So I think I've always thought that's a very valid and healthy approach, especially if you're a creative person. So that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned a poetry collection, I think, right? It was called Climate Change.
Yes.
So can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I'm always curious about what people are working on outside of Substack.
Yes. It started out with me thinking back to a particular place on Lake Superior that had changed so much over my lifetime. And I started writing a piece from the point of view of the cabin that I used to go to when I was a little kid.
Hmm.
Um, and that made me realize what a beautiful analogy climate change is for how we grow and change through life. So, and that's basically what the poem was about, was the cabin kind of watching the people change and the shoreline erode. So that's kind of how it came together in my head. Most of the pieces have that kind of duality between a human or like the narrator's growth and change and some environmental change.
Hmm. That sounds amazing. I love that concept of writing from that POV and the parallels to climate change. That's really really nice. I like that. What's the timeline on that? Do you have like any kind of estimate as to when you might for example, are you going to self-publish that one?
I will probably self-publish it. I had planned to get it done far sooner than than it is now.
Yeah.
Um, my problem is that that piece that I was just telling you about from the POV of the cabin, still think it needs a beta reader. And I actually won during Poetry Month, V Walker, and shout out to V. I love you, V. You're amazing. Um, I won the opportunity to have her work with me on a piece. So I was just thinking, now that I'm kind of back in the school year mode and have a little more control of my time, that it's time to reach out to V and see if she can help me with that piece. And then I think I have enough material now to put it together, at least as a pretty chapbook, if nothing more. So I'd say my goal is the end of the year, and
Awesome.
I'm putting that out there now. So now I have to have it out there by the end of the year.
Well, like we discussed earlier, sometimes it's good to give yourself that, like a line in the sand there.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds fantastic, though. I will, of course, be first in line to get a copy. That sounds amazing.
Well, thank you.
My next question here, the other day when you and I were talking, it was in the thread where I was mentioning that I had gotten sick or whatever. You referred to yourself as kind of the mom of the Substack community, which I love. I think that's amazing. And I was wondering like where did that sort of role come from, and how did you find yourself kind of in that place in the community?
I think it's just my personality. I've sort of always been everybody's mother since I was a teenager, and my mom became ill, and I kind of became her mom at a very young age. Ever since then, I've always been the person, like, there could be 500 people in the room, and the marginalized person will always find me.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's just, my energy. Like, I'll always listen, I'll always try to help. And then, I've kind of discovered here that many of the writers that I interact with on a daily basis, that I'm so blessed to be able to do that with, are an entire generation younger than me, which is like completely weird.
Right.
But also, I feel like the world is so different now than it was when I was kind of at the same age and stage that so many of the writers that I communicate with are now. And it's so much harder. And I think I just feel like I want to give everybody that sense of hope,
Hmm.
and like, this is not normal. And just, be sure that the people who need that little extra bit of love or positive energy or, boost to get through a day have that, because things kind of suck right now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I love that so much. The positivity in this community is just it's incredible. But as you said, things really do suck right now. And to kind of address a recent elephant in the room, a few weeks ago, I had Nikki, the nocturnal narrator, on the show here. Were you kind of around? Basically, a few weeks back, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this. Nikki had kind of called out directly what was essentially a Nazi publication on Substack, which brought up a lot of discussion around Substack's kind of laissez-faire approach to
Hmm.
moderating on there, and it kind of sent ripples through the community. And as someone who's very involved in like social and political commentary, I was wondering, were you kind of on Substack and seeing that kind of play out? And if so, what are your thoughts on that whole situation? Because like for me, for example, I tried to, obviously I took a stance against it. I was like, in so many words, I said "fuck Nazis," to make sure that everybody knew what side I was on. Um,
Yes, and I stood up and clapped when I read that, actually.
Thank
I
you.
was like on the couch with the dogs on top of me, and my poor dogs got removed so I could stand up and applaud you. So, anyway, continue, please.
No, yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I just feel like I would love to hear kind of your perspective on the situation, especially as someone who's actively kind of involved in like kind of social and political conversations. I would love to kind of hear some of your wisdom around, everything that happened there and kind of how we move forward as a community.
God, I hope I have wisdom. Nazis suck and fuck Nazis. There's no way to sugarcoat it.
Hmm.
And I think as a society, and this is very American centric, so I apologize to your listeners that aren't in the US right now. And I hope wherever you are not facing down a newly selected authoritarian government.
Hmm.
So I think it all started going wrong when the phrase alternative facts came into being. I just don't think there are alternative facts. There are certainly multiple sides to a story,
Hmm.
but there also just needs to be clear lines in the sand of right and wrong. I mean, you don't walk up to a kid on the playground and slap him in the face and take his ice cream cone, do you? Like, isn't that just empirically wrong?
Right.
Now, if he stole your ice cream cone, you can take your ice cream cone back, but you still shouldn't slap him in the face before you ask for it back first and give him the opportunity to give it to you, should you? So, why? I guess there's just such a part of me that doesn't understand, like, why we even have conversations like this. Like, wrong is wrong.
Hmm.
Hate speech is wrong. Segmenting certain parts of a population because somebody somewhere once said there was something wrong with them, or they were different, or whatever it is wrong. I mean, Hitler is not a hero. He was certainly the most evil person to exist in the modern era,
Hmm.
and Goebbels and everybody that worked with him, at least until now anyway. I'm not convinced that he's going to remain the worst in the modern era. But as of now, he still is. So, free speech is great. Hate speech does not need to be considered free speech.
Hmm.
Just like your therapist has to keep everything you say confidential unless you're saying, hey, I'm thinking about killing my ex. And I have a weapon and I know that she's alone every Tuesday night, right? Like that's where your therapist has to make a decision. Is his ex in danger? I have to go to the police. And I feel like it's just like the same thing with hate speech. Like free speech is great up until, that point where it clearly becomes something else.
Right.
And Substack, I think uniquely has a place in reframing the conversation and setting what I think are reasonable boundaries.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. And yeah, it was such a shock to the system when because when I very first joined Substack, I had heard some like kind of rumblings about that, and obviously whenever these things come up and whenever stuff like that comes to light, the question always becomes, okay, so do we just pack up and leave and go to a different platform? And I'm sure you remember my stance on the situation was to not keep giving ground in that sense, right? Like
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
should we should stand our ground. We should um, push back against it as opposed to kind of like fleeing from one platform to the other. I've always said that it's people that define a platform, right? Like at the end of the day, we our voices just they are louder and need to be continue to be louder, right? But it's just it's such a delicate situation, and like I said, it sent ripples to the community. So I was curious about your thoughts on it, and I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate a chance to talk about it. It's particularly challenging, I think, in this day and age with the conflagration of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's triggering so much more of this, like the hard right or hard alt right. I forget
Hmm.
which order it goes in. We didn't have all these things when I was growing up.
Right.
Like, there was kind of right, left, and center, not
Hmm.
all these variations. But anyway, so like the rise of the neo-Nazis in the US that were more coming from the Proud Boys thing is completely different than this whole rise that I see on the left also, which is confusing anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and history. Like it's just like history doesn't matter at all. It's just, whatever somebody heard on 15 seconds on TikTok, and that just keeps propagating and propagating and propagating. And I really don't want to see Substack become part of that. We're a place where we can have the hard conversations.
Hmm.
Absolutely. But I would rather have a hard conversation about genocide 10 times a day than have to keep swatting away a neo-Nazi fly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So, given kind of the state of everything, I guess my next question would be, what advice would you give to writers? If someone listening to this right now, they just joined Substack, or maybe they're listening to this on a different platform and they're thinking about joining Substack. Um, what advice would you give to writers, kind of starting out on their creative journey here? From your experience, how would you recommend that they kind of, become part of our community and kind of and find a place for their voice amidst everything else going on in the world?
Well, the first thing I would have to say is if you're thinking about it, do it unless you're planning to bring hate speech, in which case, stay away.
Right,
Um,
right.
but in reality, I just think, Substack has the nicest people I've never met. I think I said that to you like on your birthday, right? Yesterday?
You did,
Like,
yes, yes.
there are so many amazing people that I feel like I know that I don't, that make this such an amazing community. And I feel like if there's a place for me, there's a place for everyone. And it might take a while. Um, it's true and kind of sad. I don't always read the people that I started reading when I came onto Substack as much as I used to, because I've also found more of a place where I feel like I fit a little bit better.
Hmm.
But there's just no reason not to. And I think we all need to hear as many voices as possible. And everybody's voice is unique. Everybody's experience is unique. And I guess for anybody just thinking about, should I try this or should I try this again? Yes, because you're the only person who will contribute what you have to contribute. Nobody else can.
Yes.
Always be you and always trust that. And if you had a rotten professor in college, definitely like leave that be, bury it, send that baggage down the river. Don't carry it with you for an untold number of decades.
That's very good advice, and of course, easier said than done. I like as someone who
Yes.
I got derailed a little bit. I would say years and years ago when I was a freelance writer by some pretty harsh feedback on a piece that I had done, and an editor referred to my writing as untenable, which
Ooh.
was a major blow to the ego. So I totally understand how that derailed you, but as I mentioned earlier in the interview, I'm so happy that you found your way back. So,
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And, it's just another really interesting topic, which you might not want to get into tonight, and I totally respect that. I just think, the whole notion of rejection and where you and your work join and separate. So, you can kind of see your work is getting rejected as opposed to you're getting rejected. And that's obviously easier with things that aren't personal than things that are personal. But that's like a lot to learn and absorb and process.
yeah, yeah, no, actually, you bring up a really good point because I think that's something that a lot of writers, myself included, are constantly working on. Where it's like, how do you like over the years since my personal encounter with that editor, and I imagine since that issue with your professor, I myself at least, I've learned how to separate, feedback, like you said, from being personal and being about the work. And then, I mean, obviously there's such a thing as bad feedback, right? Like in just in the sense that it's not well delivered.
Right.
Um, But learning how to kind of accept critique, I think, is a really good topic that you bring up. And as someone who has encountered like kind of harsh or just completely wrong feedback in the past, I would love to know a little bit more actually about your thoughts there because I think it's a skill, like I said, that I'm constantly learning. How to properly receive feedback.
Well, it's another thing that I really love about Substack is having a community of writers that I trust that I can just ask for beta reading. Like I wrote a particularly what I thought was a very sensitive piece a couple months ago, and I sent it to Joe Nichols, and he and I have shared work back and forth. Back in the early days before he totally blew up and became the next best thing since Wonder Bread. Joe, I love you. Thank you for being there. And he's been an instrumental part of my journey here. And just like for me to feel that there was someone out there that I could, send a piece to and ask for feedback. And like, I knew I'd be able to take what he gave me because I knew he would give it to me in a way that I could take it.
Hmm.
And then I did the same thing earlier this week. Mary Ellen Brady, also like the most magical writer ever. Love you too, Mary Ellen. Um, I had thrown something out there like, guys, give me a topic to write about because I need to pick my own topic for Verses 6 by the Black Coffee Collective, which I also love. And um, sending a piece to Black Coffee actually was probably my first big Substack risk
Mm.
when they did a call for poems and they were only going to take 10 and I just kind of jumped off a cliff and sent one in and fortunately it turned out well but that was really scary. So anyway, so I had picked Mary Ellen's prompt, which was about the school shooting in Minneapolis, which is incredibly personal to me.
Mm.
um, but I was so close to the poem, I had no idea, like, if it would be okay to put out there. Like, is it going to be too triggering? Is it too heavy-handed? There was, I had so many questions. And her response was, "Oh, my stars, this is wonderful." Which I also love Mary Ellen because she says things like, "Oh, my stars."
Right.
And it's just so natural coming from her. Um,
Yep.
so and then, she had a couple of comments and suggested changes, and we kind of talked about why I made this choice or that choice. And again, it was safe. I
Hmm.
knew I needed the feedback, and I knew I could trust her give me the feedback. So I feel like that's probably the first step in the process of kind of being able to learn how to handle critique and rejection is being able to work with people that you trust to give you the honest critique in a way that, you'll still be friends 2 hours later. And I think once you can start handling that, it makes it easier to take those steps to go face the people who might not be so kind because you know that there's those people behind you that still believe in you and what you're doing. And that's why they help give you the constructive criticism. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yes, no, that makes complete sense. Yeah, and I think I think all writers at some point in our lives, kind of struggle with I think with rejection and like trying not to take feedback personally. So I love what you said about kind of having that inner circle, of people that you trust and you value their opinion and you have that kind of mutual respect where you know that the feedback you're going to get comes from a place of trying to genuinely help you improve your work, which I think is absolutely great advice. Yes. That brings me to the end of my questions here. But one last thing I wanted to ask you about is, do you have any other projects or anything upcoming on Substack or otherwise for the rest of the year here that you'd like to share with the audience?
I never know what's going to strike me next.
Yeah,
One thing that I would like to revisit is my series that I call the Cherries and Bitters series, which I think actually started with Madness and Mayhem.
that
I
sounds
think it
really
did.
familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I have you to thank for that. And the first prompt just like triggered this story that um, a lot of people told me that they really liked the characters. Um, And so I was inspired to write a second one where we start to find out some other things about the characters and maybe they're not so likable. And by the third installment, one of my readers, I think it was Ria de Miranda, pretty much wanted to kill one of the characters herself. So I feel kind of bad that I turned it on its end. But I don't think their story is over. So one thing I was looking at this weekend actually is going back to that trilogy and seeing if there's a way to expand it, if there's any room to add, any other pieces in the series, or if I want to try biting off putting it into like a real short story instead of three small pieces of fiction. That would be biting off a lot, but I really do kind of want to see what happens with them. And the only way I'll know is if I sit there with my fingers over the keyboard and they tell me the story.
Right. No, absolutely. And well said as well. Yeah. I would love if you return to that, and not just because it came from Madness and Mayhem. I would be genuinely excited to read that and to kind of see where it goes. So that sounds really interesting. Um,
And thank you for accepting my Madness and Mayhem submission in August, also for the one that I finally did last week that took me 3 months to write.
Not a problem at all. I always put prompts out there. Obviously, some people they really want kind of a due date, but I always kind of think of them as, they're always going to be there, and if anybody gets inspired at any point, I want to welcome that, right? So, of course.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was really challenging. So it was nice to feel like I was in a place that, like 3 months ago, I was not up to the challenge. And when I wrote it, I felt like I was up to the challenge. That doesn't mean there's not a ton of room for growth there, but at least I felt like I could take a baby step. So,
Right, right, right. Yeah.
and what do you, oh,
Sorry,
go
go
on.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, no, go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was just going to ask you what you have coming up next because you always have so many projects going on, and it's so hard to keep track of everything. And you just seem to have this like endless fountain of creativity. Um, and also always make time to support everybody else in, our little Substack corner, and also create great fun for us with like things like Madness and Mayhem. So, what's next? What do I have to look forward to?
Okay, yeah, no, it's a great question, and I super appreciate the compliment as well. Yeah, no, for me it's like 50-50. It's like I'm on Substack to obviously share my work, grow an audience, grow as a writer, but just as important and right alongside that is nurturing this community, growing this community, welcoming new members of the community, and supporting my fellow writers. Like that's my mission statement in a nutshell. But yeah, as far as what I have coming up, honestly, sometimes I have trouble keeping track of all the projects. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole list, but what's relevant to our conversation here, and I think like kind of in the near term here is, I just wrapped up. Actually, this was a conversation I had earlier on Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast. We were talking about my fantasy sci-fi universe that some of my stories are set in, and I just wrapped up a series of what I called preludes, where they were sort of like character-focused stories, introducing the cast of an upcoming series that I've wanted to do set in that world for years and years. I just never, at this point on Substack, that universe of Devine, it has an actual audience now, and I see people all the time who consider themselves Devine fans, right? So it's now felt like the time to finally take that leap into doing my first ever kind of ongoing serial fiction kind of series on Substack. So earlier today, I was on Mina's podcast, and I talked about how I think September 16th was the date I set for chapter one of that series. So that's something to look forward to. That's starting soon, and I'm going to do bi-weekly chapters of that. Give myself 2 weeks to write each one, just because I know I'll have a bunch of other stuff going on in between. As far as prompts go, I'm sure you've seen them, but I've been doing the power up prompts every Saturday as kind of a way just to keep prompts coming from me on a consistent basis. My true love when it comes to prompts are those big, bold 30-day challenges, right? So since you asked, I am in the process of planning a new 30-day challenge. I wanted to do one here in September, but it didn't really pan out that way. So I'm putting a stake in the ground. October for sure. I'm gonna do because a lot of what I write is horror. I definitely want to do like some sort of horror Halloween, October themed 30-day challenge, where again we're doing a new prompt, a new challenge every single day throughout the month of October. And I don't have details on it yet, but much like how, I started with Flash Fiction February, and then I tried to quote unquote level up with Madness and Mayhem, give it like a new spin, a new concept, a new way to kind of challenge fellow writers. The October challenge, I'm going for the same thing, where it's like, I know it's going to be sort of like horror themed because of the month, but I'm going to go deeper than that. I'm going to come up with something that I'm still in the brainstorming phase here, but I want to constantly sort of bring that unpredictability to the event each time I do one of those month-long challenges, where I'm finding new ways to kind of keep my fellow writers on their toes. So you can definitely look forward to that. I don't have all the details yet, but I obviously will try to get it together sooner rather than later and start kind of putting out some teasers here and there for it. But that's definitely something to look forward to, is one of my classic month-long challenges in October.
Yay. All right. I'm really excited for that. Thank you. October's my month anyway, because, every place you go, you see things that say boo on it. So
Right.
it sounds like this will be another great piece to my October.
Yeah, no, and I'm super excited to see what you come up with. I've always enjoyed reading your stuff, especially, when it comes from prompts. It's always awesome to see that creativity spark in one of my fellow writers. And I do have, speaking of prompt inspired stories, I have your piece pulled up here, so that in the spirit of our conversation, I can give it a deeper read and leave some feedback there, and obviously restack it, because I've been meaning to do that. Now that we talked about it, it's top of mind. I've got it open on my screen here. So
Boy, I hope it lives up to the hype.
no, I'm very excited. I'm very excited. And yeah, like I said, that was all for my questions that I had here. But I really appreciate you taking the time here to come on the show, Boo. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of your work and all the positivity that you bring to the table and everything you do in the community here. It's people like you that inspire me to keep doing what I'm doing, and it's just I love to see it. And yeah, again, I'm just really grateful for your time and for your thoughts here today.
But thank you so much for having me, and back at you. It's people like you that really made me feel like I belong, and that I want to go back, and that I want to, give all the love and support to people as they come in that I've received as I've, sort of settled into our virtual coffee shop. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your support for me, and for bringing new people to the fore that otherwise I would never find out. And I just hope you get some sleep now and again. That's me being a mom again, but it seems like you're always working. So I do hope you get some rest now and again.
I'm always trying to find that balance, right? I'm no stranger to burning myself out between my day job and then obviously everything that I do creatively on Substack. So I always appreciate the reminder there to keep that balance. All right. Well, thank you again, Boo. This was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Bradley, and thank you for your time as well.
A huge thank you to Boo again for joining me this week. It was such a wonderful interview. It was extremely authentic and so very valuable for writers at every stage of their creative journey. So a big thank you to Boo for joining the show this week. All right. Next up, we'll take a look at what's happening next week on the writer's journey. All right, so next week on Substack is going to be busy as always. We've got a new power-up prompt coming out tomorrow, and then I'm going to continue my new series that I started this week called An Hour to Anywhere. If you have yet to check it out, this is a horror series I'm doing that'll be roughly 5 parts, and it will include immersive audio elements within the story. It's a series about a new form of travel that lets you go anywhere in the world in an hour. The only catch is that you have to take a detour through an unknown dimension. The series is set in the same world as another short 2-part story I did called Crush Depth, so if you liked those, you'll want to tune in for this one. Part 1 is out now, and Part 2 will be out very soon. This coming week, I'm also planning on outlining the upcoming Devine series, The Order of the Pawn. As I mentioned on Mina's podcast earlier this week, that series is officially launching September 16th. Crazy that it's finally here after all these years. All right, folks, well, that's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for being here as always. Thank you for joining my prompts, for sharing your thoughts in my writing discussion threads, and for just all around being the best human beings and writers that I've ever honestly met. You're all amazing, and I hope you have an equally amazing week. This is Bradley Ramsey, signing off. Ah, Fintan, damn it, don't scare me like that. Well, I thought you could use a taste of your own medicine. And besides, I didn't get to make the boo joke at the beginning of this episode. Okay, fine. I'll allow it.